Hey folks, I'm Ayon Shahed. I'm the president of Branch Innovations and a VP of Innovation and Business Development with Seafair Capital. I'm also an aspiring photographer and a huge Taylor Swift fan.
So you are one of Atlantic Canada's top 50 under 40. You started your career as an engineer at Honeywell. Can you tell me about your transition from engineer at Honeywell to Engineers Without Borders and Choices for Youth and your social impact work?
Yeah, absolutely. I found myself in Newfoundland about 10 years ago, but it's been a
Yeah.
bit of a journey getting here.
Mhm.
So I'm part of an immigrant family. We moved to Canada a couple times, first in the 90s, in 1990 actually, and then again in 2002.
Yep.
And my parents always told me I had to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. Those were kind of the only things on the table.
Golden
Um,
trifecta
you
for
got it
immigrant
exactly.
parents.
What else? Nothing else matters really.
Hmm.
Like if you got to do one of those things if you're going to be successful.
Yep.
So coming out of, I've actually finished high school in Kingston, Ontario.
Mhm.
But during that time between the 90s and 2002, I'd been back and forth between Bangladesh and Canada a few times. I went into the space of renewable energy, sustainability, and kind of really enjoyed that for a while when I was in university.
Mhm.
When I left university, you kind of have this, for me anyways, this void of community at first.
Yep.
There's all these different clubs and communities. You talk about world issues. You're in school. It's kind of a really beautiful place to be in that academic environment.
Yep.
You're in this hyper growth phase of your life. Honeywell was a fantastic place to work. I had a great manager, a great team, but I found myself in this kind of massive machine and I was a tiny little cog. And
Mhm.
I was doing the best I could and the team was super supportive, but it was absolutely killing me in terms of my creativity, my ability to feel like I could have an impact, that I was working on really important issues.
Mhm.
So while I was at Honeywell, I got involved with Engineers Without Borders. So I started volunteering for them in Toronto with the Toronto professional chapter, and I just fell in love with the organization. They think about kind of global issues, poverty reduction from a systems point of view,
Mhm.
whether that's different types of technology, whether that's entrepreneurship, whether that's kind of governance solutions, really taking that engineering lens to solve social issues. So I got involved with them as a volunteer, and it was about a year later, actually, a couple of years later, I left Honeywell and joined their Toronto office.
Mm.
My wife is a Newfoundlander. I met her at EWB. She's not an engineer. They have a lot of different types of staff.
Mhm.
And she was always involved in kind of youth leadership development and program engagement. But when we decided to move here, she decided we were going to move here. We made our way over. And I think at that point, it was another decision point around, do I stay in this community impact kind of space,
Yep.
or do I move back into technical engineering? And when we landed here, I was lucky enough to meet the folks at Choices for Youth. Rest is history kind of from there. Was able to bring
Okay.
that mindset into that world and really enjoyed that.
So I've got to ask, so what was your parents' reaction when you decided that you were going to kind of leave the engineering
I feel like I
world?
continuously surprise, disappoint, and impress my parents at the same time.
Same.
When I left engineering, they couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Like they're like, "What do you mean you're leaving? An engineering job at a large firm to go work at a nonprofit?" For they paid the best they could, but in Toronto, it wasn't making ends meet really. Um, so they were pretty shocked that was a decision I made. And then a few years later, I was like, "Hey, I guess I'm moving to Newfoundland." With Anna. She's great. It only met her a couple times at that point. They're like, "What the hell are you doing?" Um, but they've always been really supportive.
Yeah,
I think as parents, they're worried. They just want to make sure that
absolutely.
you're actually thinking things through. That you have a backup plan, all that kind of stuff. We didn't really have a backup plan, but we were, I think, young enough and excited enough to just like kind of give it a shot.
So you moved to Newfoundland and Labrador. You decided you were going to be starting. So
Yeah, yeah.
you didn't come here with a set job or an idea of what you wanted to do, and you started working with Choices for Youth. Is that, and you were
Yeah.
looking? Did you continue wanting to work in social impact? Is that, how did you decide to do that? I guess versus going back to engineering. Was there reflection in the 30 days?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, relationships have always been really important and
Mm,
what they feel like. I know that sounds kind of soft.
yeah.
It was when I got the offer from Choices for Youth, it was the same week I got an offer from Newfoundland Power. And so one would have taken me back into kind of engineering and sustainability and renewable tech, and the other would have taken me deeper into kind of social impact.
Wow.
And I wasn't sure entirely which option to take. They were really similar, very different. They're similar in terms of kind of level and
Mm-hmm.
kind of what the next step could look like, but
Yep.
really different in terms of sector. But I had an interview with Sheldon Pollitt, who's the outgoing ED at Choices for Youth,
Mhm.
and he was just fantastic. Got along with him right away.
Yep.
We kind of spoke the same language. We're talking about the same kinds of issues,
Mhm.
and I think it was that relationship. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna take a jump there. That feels right. And in retrospect, it was definitely the right call. I was new to Newfoundland. I know Anna's from here. It was
Mhm.
my second time here.
Yep.
And, I knew the place from what tourist ads show you, and it
Yep.
was a beautiful place. The first
Absolutely.
time I was here, we went hiking. I was playing the Lord of the Rings soundtrack on my phone just to really
Get
kind
get in
of
the
get in the
zone.
zone. Yeah, it was beautiful. I loved it here. But working for Choice for Youth as the first thing I did here,
Mhm.
um, I'm really grateful for that because I got to see the full scope of the city. I got to see everything that's amazing about it, but also kind of what's wrong and
Mhm.
how people are struggling. And a lot of the issues in St. John's aren't as visible as what we would see in big places like Toronto,
Mhm.
but they're here, right?
Mhm.
And so I think I got a much more grounded sense of what was going on in St. John's and in our province,
Mhm.
and at the same time got to work on some really incredible projects and with some incredible people. I've been for Choices for a long time. It was about eight
Yeah.
years,
Yep.
and I was ready kind of to think about what was next.
Mhm.
I said, impact was still important to me. I just
Yep.
wasn't sure where to go
Mhm.
next. I'd been looking for a couple of years, and I got the chance to meet Ann Whalen, the CEO of Seafair. So Seafair Capital is effectively represents a group of organizations.
Mhm.
There's a number of companies and organizations within the group. Broadly speaking, most of them are involved in the delivery of care in community.
Yep.
So one of our largest companies is actually called Bright Isle,
Mhm.
and Bright Isle provides better care for people in the community, right? So that's care for children and families, that's care for seniors, folks with intellectual disabilities. They do a little bit of work up in Labrador, working with Indigenous communities
Mhm.
around capacity building and development, work a lot with vulnerable families. And so Bright Owl is really around trying to elevate what good care looks like in the
Mhm.
community, right?
Mhm.
Started here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We're across the whole province in every region.
Mhm.
And they're really looking at kind of bringing that same kind of quality, accredited, values driven care to other parts of Canada in the community.
Mm.
That's still the largest part of the organization at Seafair.
Yep.
There's a few other groups. We have a number of investments, particularly in tech companies, largely in health tech, and a couple other places. We have a large supply chain logistics organization as well called Headway. Headway kind of started around the pandemic era, really
Mhm.
tried to help solve some of those supply chain challenges. Um, and was became one of the largest providers of kind of medical supplies and PPE in the community
Mhm.
over that time. And so now they're trying to answer the question of we've built this kind of strong capacity and capability in how to do that well.
Mhm.
What else could we do? Right.
Yep.
And so Headway's actively answering that question to figure out how can they solve problems in the kind of the supply chain world? How can they add value in logistics,
Mhm.
shipping, that kind of thing? Um, then we have Branch Innovations,
Yep.
and so Branch Innovations is a division of Seafair. It's kind of where we've put a lot of our kind of R&D, our innovation and technology work. So
Mhm.
any of our emerging business units would typically be under Branch Innovations. A lot of our technology work would be under Branch Innovations.
Got it.
In some ways, it's almost our own kind of internal startup accelerator.
Mhm.
In other ways, it's also where we facilitate new investments into other organizations.
Mhm.
And so some of our investments are happening through Branch, and some of our newer startup initiatives like Discharge Hub, as a
Mhm.
company that we hope to grow, is kind of being hosted out of Branch until it can be on its own and kind of join the Seafair group versus be just inside Branch Innovations right now.
Okay.
And so within Branch, I talked about largely focused on those process transitional components
Yep.
of healthcare, but also involved in some knowledge mobilization, fintech, um, in kind of doing business differently in small communities. We're also active in Florida, and so
Mhm.
we have operations down there. So when we think about our footprint here in Newfoundland and in Florida, and what we're trying to do with kind of all the organizations in the group,
Mhm.
we really want to think about bringing our impact and our ideas to other markets. So the other thing Branch Innovations allows us to do, um, technology products, managed services, software, they're scalable in a different way than some
Mhm.
of our direct care organizations.
Mhm.
And so those kind of give us a different way of thinking about expansion and kind of leaping into other spaces. And so
Mhm.
some of the things that we're doing at Branch, we're actively having conversations in Nova Scotia and in Ontario of what it looks like to bring kind of some of our ideas forward there and kind of commercialize into new markets. We've been on a couple missions in the States as well, working with
Mhm.
our partners to figure out what that looks like. And certainly with our largest organization, Bright Isle,
Mhm.
we're looking at what's the next place for us to really bring quality care in Canada. So if I look at the next few years for Seafair, the hope is we're in a few different places, um, largely kind of driven by our technology products and also kind of a growing base of operations and the way we provide care in community
Mhm.
and elevating what that looks like.
So I'm going to ask a little bit about, so as a person of color in a leadership role, so
Hmm.
you are part of, the executive at Seafair Capital. How do you think that, diversity and inclusion kind of plays a role within the success of the company?
I've been really fortunate at Seafair. Our Newfoundland. I said earlier that diversity has improved dramatically
Yeah.
over the last 10 years, which has been phenomenal to see and really exciting. Um, I'm still
Has been exciting, isn't
surprised.
it? It
It
is
is
it is
exciting,
exciting. It
yeah.
is. It really is.
I think as a leader in this space, you and I have been on committees together talking about
Absolutely, yeah.
diversity. As a personal kind of reflection, I've kind of always had this tension with the DEIB kind of initiatives.
Mhm.
And the tension is, I think, around how do we think about definitions and buckets and identities, right?
Mhm.
I think it's so important that we think about um, representation and that we count, how many women are in leadership roles, how many people of color,
Mhm.
how many people from the LGBTQS community, from the disability community, et cetera. The challenge I've always found is sometimes we use those as starting points and as endpoints.
Mhm.
And that can't be the endpoint, right?
Yep.
Because no group is homogenous, right?
Mhm.
And so it's important that we start asking and identifying those buckets. So when we think about what's going to help someone succeed and what's going to help someone do well, we have to start looking at best people as individuals. In my experience, Newfoundland has been an accelerator for my professional development in my career. I certainly learned a lot in Toronto and the work I was doing there. But when I came to Newfoundland, it was you can bring all your ideas, you can stretch your arms, you can imagine what you want to do, and there's a real opportunity to do that here.
Mhm.
People want to support you. People are invested in your success, and it's again a small enough place that you can meet whoever you need to meet. If you're that kind of mindset, you're that kind of student, or you want to take that kind of leap, this
Mhm.
is a pretty great place to do it. And the chances are that you're going to do well.
All right. Well, Ayon, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah, this was a
Yeah.
wonderful conversation, and I think inspiring for anybody else to take many big swings.
Thanks, Mimi.
So, thank you.